We read The Lord of the Rings mostly from the perspective of the members of the Fellowship. But what was Saruman's perspective on what happened? What did he know? When did he know it? And what did he do about it? Reading The Lord of the Rings with an eye to Saruman's perspective is a different exercise than doing it for Sauron. But when it comes to Saruman, his story is quite tragic one. You'll know what I'm saying. But you can't understand his choices during the War of the Ring without understanding what he believed about himself long before it started. Saruman was originally Kurumo, a Maya of the household of Aule the Smith, the same household Sauron himself came from before his fall started. Their common origin gave Sauron an unfair advantage. As soon as their paths crossed, he saw through Saruman's plans with little to no effort. He understood the kind of mind Saruman had because they had both come from Olor's household. When the Valar himself decided to stop Sauron's growing shadow around the year 1000 of the Third Age, Saruman volunteered first and was regarded as head of the mission, but Manwë also called for a Lorin, whom we know as Gandalf, and at that Council of Vardar made a small remark about Olorin's place in the Order of the Three Messengers, not as the third. Saruman remembered that line for the rest of his existence. From his perspective, it was the first sign that his rank wasn't as secure as he assumed. He arrived at the Grey Havens first in white and was accepted as the head of the Astari without any argument. Then Círdan, also known as Nolve, who saw further than almost anyone in Middle-earth, gave Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf instead of to him. And when Saruman found out about this, because finding out things about people's hidden desires and motives was one of his genuine skills, and from his perspective, this was intolerable, he considered the Lord of the Rings his own particular province. In Saruman's eyes, Gandalf had never deserved the Elven Ring in the first place. He believed that Elven Ring belongs to him, and he was convinced that this mistake would one day be set right in future. For the time being, he remained patient, watching, learning, and feeding his growing resentment. When the White Council was founded in 2463, the old resentment returned. Initially, Galadriel wanted Gandalf to lead the council, but Gandalf declined the role, and Saruman became its head instead, knowing he had been chosen only after Gandalf refused. This resentment stayed with him for the rest of his life. Just so you know, there's a smaller, almost comic version of the same wound that surfaces around this time too. At a council meeting, Gandalf sat off to one side smoking a long pipe of Shire leaf, and Saruman mocked him publicly for it, calling it a toy beneath the dignity of the wise. Then, unable to let go of a habit belonging to the one rival he could never stop measuring himself against, he took it up himself in secret and started cultivating agents among hobbit families like the Sackville Bagginses to keep a private supply flowing north. From Saruman's perspective, this was a minor indulgence, easily hidden. It's also, quietly, the actual origin of his interest in the Shire, years before he had any strategic reason to care about the place at all. By the time the White Council met in 2851, Saruman's private resentment had grown into something far more dangerous. He had begun putting his own plans into motion, and when Gandalf confirmed that Sauron was the master of Dol Guldur and wanted to attack without delay, but Saruman convinced the council that the One Ring had disappeared into the Great Sea after being carried down the Anduin long ago. It wasn't true. From Saruman's perspective, he believed that if Sauron was left alone a little longer in Dol Guldur, the One Ring would eventually reveal itself as it searched for its master, and when that happened, he intended to claim it for himself. From that moment on, he had betrayed the very council he led, and no one else in the room realized it. Saruman arrived at Isengard in 2759 as the new Warden of Gondor. Publicly, that was his purpose. But he had his own private things. He had come to Gondor because he believed the tower still contained one of the ancient Palantiri. As the years passed, he kept the appearance of a faithful guardian while slowly remaking the Wizard's Veil in the image of Barad-dûr. Searching the Gladden fields for any trace of the ring, he found instead the Elendil Mir, the lost star of the North Kingdom, and locked it away in Orthanc without telling anyone. It was only a small theft, but it revealed how much Saruman's sense of entitlement had grown. Around the year 3000, he finally used the stone he'd been protecting all along, confident his own will was equal to whatever waited on the other end. What he didn't know, or didn't want to believe, was that Ithil's stone had been in Sauron's hands since 2002, and these stones are naturally attuned to each other. From that point on, Sauron held the advantage, and Saruman believed he was playing a clever double game by using Sauron while fulfilling his own dreams and ambitions. In reality, he had already fallen under Sauron's influence and answered to Mordor whenever he called it. By the summer of 3018, Saruman believed he was running out of options, and Nazgul were closing in on the ring at the same time, and Sauron was also growing suspicious, and time was slipping away. So he used Radagast, who had no idea he was being manipulated, to bring Gandalf to Isengard. Once Gandalf arrived, Saruman made his proposal, not a trap for its own sake, an actual proposition, and it goes like this. "The day of the elves is over," he told him. "The day of wizards and men of skill has come. Bide their time, tolerate whatever evils happened along the way, and steer the new power toward knowledge, rule, and order." The council had already been hindered by weaker friends, and never managed to achieve anything on its own. From Saruman's perspective, this was pragmatism, not villainy. He genuinely expected Gandalf to see the logic of it. When Gandalf refused, Saruman's tone went cold immediately, and Gandalf became a prisoner on the pinnacle of Orthanc. Even after was Gandalf caged in Orthanc, Saruman kept playing both sides, because from his perspective that was still winning move, but little did he know. When the Witch King arrived at his gates that September, demanding answers about Hobbit Ansha, Saruman used his voice to insist he knew nothing of the Shire, sending the Nazgul chasing Gandalf while his own agents searched for the ring independently. It might have worked, but it didn't. It fell apart quickly because his own Saruman's spies were caught near Farbad carrying detailed maps of the Shire, proof that he knew far more than he'd admitted. From that moment, Sauron marked him as a traitor to his own master, and the pretending was effectively over. Everything changed in an instant when Gwaihir, acting on Radagast's request, rescued Gandalf from the top of Orthanc before Saruman even realized what had happened. As the eagle disappeared toward Edoras, Saruman knew exactly what it meant. He was no longer a quiet plotter hedging between two great powers. He was known to both of them now and trusted by neither, and the only strategy left open to him was open war, fought quickly, before Sauron decided to deal with the traitor first. His war plan tells you exactly how he was still reasoning at this point, but before that, if you don't know that Rohan's real strength lived in two men, Theodred and Eomer, since Theoden himself had already been worn down for years by Grima's council. So Saruman gave explicit orders that Theodred, above anyone else on the field, was to be killed at the fords of Isen. He got exactly what he wanted. At the same time, in parallel, he sent Uruk-hai under a captain named Ugluk to intercept the Fellowship, with orders to bring back any hobbit alive they could find, because from his perspective, all that mattered was getting a living hobbit to Orthanc for questioning. For perhaps the first time in years, Saruman abandoned his usual caution. Fearing that someone else might reach the ring first, he rode out from Isengard to intercept the company himself. Gandalf later described it as a strange mistake for someone who was normally so careful. The army carrying out that order didn't exist by accident. Saruman had gone back into the darkest corners of the First Age, the methods Morgoth had first used to twist living things into orcs, and taken it further, crossbreeding orcs with men to build soldiers who kept an orc's strength and cruelty without an orc's weakness to daylight. From his perspective, this was simply good engineering, a problem solved efficiently. It's also the clearest possible window into how he'd come to see living things generally by this point in his life. What Saruman never accounted for, and this is the actual center of his downfall, was Fangorn. He looked at the forest crowding his industrial valley and saw fuel, nothing more, and he dismissed the Ents as slow, half-forgotten things that no longer mattered in what he considered a new age. From his perspective, they simply weren't a variable worth planning around, confident that Isengard was untouchable, as Saruman marched out with more than 10,000 troops to crush Rohan at Helm's Deep, believing nothing in Middle-earth could threaten his fortress while he was away. He was wrong this time also, while the Hornburg did not fall, and behind him, after years of watching Saruman burn forests and cut down their trees, Treebeard gathered the Ents. They marched on Isengard themselves. Saruman fought back the only way his mind knew, but sending jets of fire up from vents in the plain to scorch the attackers, which only enraged them further. The Ents tore open the dams and flooded the valley, and Saruman watched his life's work drown from the one place they couldn't break into, which was the tower itself. A few days later, Gandalf, returned from death and now robed in white, called him down to answer for it. Saruman still had his voice, and he used it exactly as he always had, proposing that the two of them simply divide their spheres of influence, as though nothing that had happened changed the basic shape of the negotiation. That's the detail that says the most about how he saw himself even at the bottom of total defeat. He still couldn't picture an ending that didn't involve him keeping some share of power. Gandalf offered him one real chance to walk away from all of the chaos he had created, but his pride wouldn't let him take it off. So Gandalf broke him publicly, snapping his staff in his hand and casting him out of the order he'd once led. By the time the Fellowship crossed paths with him again in August 3019, Treebeard had already released Saruman, convinced by the wizard's voice that he was no longer a threat. But Saruman wasn't finished. Everything that mattered to him had already been taken. Mordor had fallen. There was no war left to win and no ring left to chase, and from his perspective, the only thing left worth doing was making someone else feel what he felt. He had a network already in place in the Shire, built years earlier through Silver and a proxy named Lotho Sackville Baggins, and when Saruman himself arrived in September under the name Sharkey, Lotho's authority collapsed instantly. What followed wasn't part of any larger plan, but it was revenge. Saruman filled the Shire with noisy mills and ugly machines that polluted the rivers instead of serving the people. Trees were cut down without purpose, and harsh new rules left the hobbits hungry while his own men had plenty to eat. When it was over, Saruman explained his actions with chilling simplicity. One ill turn deserves another. He had lost Isengard, so he set out to ruin the place Gandalf loved most, and called it justice. When Frodo finally confronted him at the door of a scarred Bag End, Saruman still had enough contempt left to mock the hobbits for expecting a quiet homecoming, and Frodo, having carried something far heavier through Mordor, ordered him to leave and refused to let the others kill him. Moments later, after one final act of cruelty toward Grima, his long-suffering servant turned on him and killed him. What rose from his body afterward was a grey mist that looked toward the west he'd abandoned so long ago, and a cold wind out of the west simply dissolved it into nothing. No return, no welcome. Having forsaken the purpose Aule first sent him to Middle-earth to carry out, Saruman was refused even the mercy Gandalf had been given, the chance to go back and finish the job properly. It's tempting to read him as a lesser copy of Sauron, a villain who almost made it, but that misses what actually makes his story land. Sauron was always driven by the desire to rule over others, but Saruman's fall was far more gradual. He started as a respected leader with an important purpose, but resentment, pride, and the belief that he always knew best slowly changed him. He justified every decision along the way, never realizing what he had become. That is the tragedy at the heart of his story. If you'd like to see more videos diving deep into the world of The Lord of the Rings, there's a video on the left of your screen, and consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps small channels like this. Take care and be safe, and that's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.